All right, welcome to Module 1, Lesson 5. Right now, we are going to look at Example 1, the Highway Patrol question. So, a county superintendent of highways is interested in the number of different types of vehicles that regularly travel within his county. In the month of August, a total of 192 registrations were purchased for passenger cars and pickup trucks at the local Department of Motor Vehicles. We call it the DMV. The DMV reported that in the month of August, for every 5 passenger cars registered, there were 7 pickup trucks registered. The question here that we want to answer is how many of each type of vehicle were registered in the county in the month of August. So in this case, we're looking for how many of each type. So we're looking for the total of each type. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to break this down into a couple different pieces. First, we want to look at what's the important information here. So, is it important to know about the county superintendent of highways? Not necessarily. We already know what question he's trying to answer. So, we want to look at what's important from there on out. So, in the month of August, does it matter that it's August? In this case, it kind of does, because as long as we know that we're working in the month of August and that we have a ratio from the month of August, since they match up, we know that we can use the data because they're from the same time period. If they told us that in April a total of 192 registrations were purchased and then gave us a ratio from August, that wouldn't work. So some other important pieces here, there were a total of 192 registrations. And is it important that it's from the DMV? No. Is it important that there were 5 passenger cars registered? Yes, I would say so. And that there were 7 pickup trucks registered? I would say so. And then, of course, the question is always important. All right, so we have 3 pieces of information here. The first thing that we want to look at is, let's take a look at using the information in the problem. I want you to write 4 different ratios and describe what each of them mean. Okay, so I'll give you a quick example. We can say that the ratio of cars to trucks is 5 to 7. Okay, so cars to trucks is 5 to 7. Now, this would be called a part-to-part ratio. The reason it's part-to-part is because we know the whole, the total, is 192. Cars is one part of that total number, and trucks is another part of that total number. So any number that corresponds with cars and any number that corresponds just with trucks is considered a part. So this would be a part-to-part ratio. So what I'd like you to do here is I'd like you to take a minute and pause, and I want you to come up with 3 different ratios and describe the meaning of each. So tell me what the ratio represents, and is it part to part, whole to part to whole? What type of ratio is it? All right, so you could have come back and said that the ratio of trucks to cars is 7 to 5. So we could say trucks to cars is 7 to 5. Again, this would be a part to part. We could also say that the ratio of cars to total vehicles is 5 to 192. This would be called a part to whole, because we know that the number of cars is a part of that whole number of 192 vehicles. Okay, we could also say that the ratio of trucks to the total is 7 to 192, again being a part to whole. Or you could have switched these and said that the total number of vehicles to cars was 192 to 5. Okay, so now this would be whole to part. And you could also switch around the total to trucks. Now, does it matter what order the numbers are in, yes, it matters as long as your words and your ratio match up, then your ratio is okay. If they do not match up, then your ratio is not okay, because if you were to put, instead of 192 first in this one, if you did total cars, total to cars, and you did 192 where the cars is supposed to go, you did it second. Well, now all of a sudden it sounds like there's 192 cars and only 5 total vehicles. That doesn't make much sense to have a total of 5 vehicles and 192 of them are cars. So you want to make sure to put those numbers in the right spot. All right, give us some room here. I'm going to make this smaller. Again, you could have any of those. You do not have to have all of them. You just need to have some of them. You just need to have a total of 4. Okay, because the next thing that we are going to look at is we're going to make a tape diagram that represents the quantities in the part-to-part ratios that we wrote. All right, so remember the tape diagram is the boxes. I want you to take a minute and pause and draw your own tape diagram. When you come back, we'll check your answer. All right, so in this case, my tape diagram, I would have, and I would just do my cars on top. And I don't want that to have anything on the inside, so I'm going to try and draw that again. And do my trucks on bottom. Now, do these have to be perfect and line up perfectly? No, but you want them to be somewhat the same just so they make sense. All right, so now I have to go and label. So here are my number of cars and trucks. Now, I know because it's part to part, so I don't want to do the 192, that's total. I'm just doing the ratio of cars to pickup trucks, and that is 5 to 7. So for every 5 cars, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there has to be 7 trucks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And notice it's not perfect, but now my tape diagram represents the number of cars to trucks. Okay, so the next question that I can answer here, okay, and this is going to come into play later. This, we have noticed, can help us figure out if I want to know how many of each type of cars, I know that I can use this tape diagram and other information from the problem to help me solve the problem. So let's take a look here. How many equal sized parts does the diagram consist of? So in here, how many equal parts are there? Okay, you should have come up with 12. There were 12 equal parts in this tape diagram. Okay, so right now we're working with a total of 12 cars, just with this 5 to 7 ratio. Well, we know that's not even close to the total number of cars that there are out on the roads. So we also want to look at, okay, give us some more room here. Again, here's cars, here's trucks. We know that there are 12 total right now, right in here. And we know that our overall total would be the 192. We're working with the 5 passenger, 7 pickup trucks. And we want to know how many of each type of vehicle were registered in the county in the month of August. So how many of each? That's really important. All right, so the next question that we would want to look at is, what does the total tape diagram represent? Okay, so right now we only have 12 total pieces in our tape diagram. And we know that it actually represents all 192. So even though we only drew 12, this is just a picture that represents a total of 192. So it's a small picture that represents a bigger set of numbers. So since we know that it represents 192 vehicles, we need to know what value does each individual part of the tape diagram represent. So what this is asking is, if the tape diagram has 12 pieces, and we know that those 12 pieces have to somehow represent the 192 total cars, we need to figure out what each box is worth. Okay, so inside each box there has to be a certain amount to make sure that when we add them all together, it equals 192. In order to solve that, I take my total number of cars and I divide it by 12. And when I do that, I get 16. So I know that even though we only have the ratio of 5 to 7, I know that each of these boxes represents a total of 16 cars. So when I break it down to the smallest or the most simplified ratio, it's 5 to 7. But since I'm working with 192 total pieces, I need to figure out what each box represents in order to get me to 192. So again, I have 16 in each of these boxes, and I know that when I add them all together, they're going to give me the 192 total vehicles that were registered in the month of August. So this is where using that smaller ratio is going to help us figure out that bigger number by using the total. Okay, so we use the total and the tape diagram to figure out what each box represents. Then the last thing that we can do is if we know that each of these boxes, so we use the ratio of 5 to 7, we know that the cars would have 5 boxes and the trucks would have 7 based on our original ratio. Then we know that since there's 192 total vehicles, we can use that ratio to help us figure out how much each of these is actually worth or representing. So I know that if I have 5, so every one box in the car represents 16 cars, and I have 5 boxes, so I can take 5 and multiply it by 16. Right? And I know that that will give me 80. So I know that there were 80 total cars. And then I can take the 7 and multiply it by 16. And I know that will give me 112 trucks. Okay, so we needed to use the total number of cars to figure out what each box in our tape diagram would represent. So we use the diagram to help us break it down a little bit more, to help us figure out, well, if I have the ratio of 5 to 7, and that's a total of 12, how can I use that ratio to help me figure out what would give me a total of 192? And we figured out there was that a total of 80 cars and 12 trucks would still be the ratio of 5 to 7, and it would give you that 192 total amount of cars. Again, I'm not expecting you to completely understand this by the time you come to class, but I do want you to make sure that if you have questions to write them down. Okay, because what we're going to do is tomorrow when you come back to class, we are going to go over this next problem. Okay, that also involves the superintendent of highways, and I would like you to give this problem a shot before you come back to class. So again, look and find the important information. Okay, and I want you to see if you can come up with a plan to solve this problem. Again, when you come to class, we'll be working on it together. So please come with a plan, but I do not expect you to have it completely answered. If you think you have it down, absolutely go ahead and try that. And if you have any questions, make sure to write them down so we can go over them in class tomorrow.